Hey class, uh, as a preliminary matter, I wanted to let you guys know that a couple of the classes didn't make it all the way through the discussion of the powers on Friday. Thus, what I wanted to do was cover the last couple slides from our presentation in class. For those of you who've already covered the enumerated powers of treaties, reception, and convening, fast forward the video to the screen that says roles of the president and start there. Okay, for everybody else, I wanted to finish this off. The powers of the president as they relate to treaties, it's a formal power, of course. The president, through the State Department, enters into treaties with foreign governments. It's a constitutional power, which is checked by the Senate. Of course, as I'm sure you're gathering from yesterday's discussion, the U.S. Senate is the primary check on the power of the president. A two-thirds vote is required to approve treaties. That's 67 of the 100 senators. Now, ratified treaties are a very powerful thing. They actually preempt federal law. So if there's a treaty provision that is in conflict with a federal law, the treaty provision wins and is enforced. So these are very significant matters that that can be negotiated by the president. The powers of reception are similarly related to those of the powers of the treaty, and together they give the president most of the foreign policy setting powers that he has, or at least the formal policy settings, foreign policy settings. It's the power to receive ambassadors from other countries. Now, this is significant because the power to receive ambassadors is also the power to recognize the legitimacy of a particular government of a country. And so when you consider that the president is the face of America to the rest of the world, you begin to see how significant this role is. Let's say a country is undergoing some sort of revolution or a civil war. Well, if the President of the United States accepts one of the two sides in that civil war's diplomats as the representatives of that country, then impliedly, and quite frankly, literally, the president is recognizing which side in the Civil War is the legitimate government. And America's word has a lot of authority throughout the world. So this is another of these foreign policy powers that are quite significant. Finally, the president also has the power to convene Congress. The president's also got the power to deliver a State of the Union address to a joint session of Congress. Well, this is related to the president's power to advance a legislative agenda. Okay, the president has the ability to essentially say, look, Congress, this is what I want you to do. And then after that is the case, presumably the president's political party is going to attempt to realize parts or all of that legislative agenda. Now, the presidential power also, this convening power, gives the president to demand that members of Congress from either or both chambers of Congress meet to consider a particular piece of legislation, a particular appointment, that kind of thing. Now, over our 230 plus years history, the House of Representatives has never been convened by the president. Which chamber has? That's right, the Senate. The Senate has been convened dozens of times. And you should consider why. Well, how much interaction does the Senate have with treaties that the president and the State Department negotiate? How much interaction does the U.S. Senate have with appointments that the president makes? You can see that there's much greater likelihood that the U.S. Senate and the president are going to be at loggerheads, and the president will be more likely to convene and bring back into session the Senate to consider legislation, or excuse me, to consider appointments, to consider treaties, that kind of thing, than the House. and that history bears that out. Now, I wanted to resolve those points just early on so that we can all start from the same place today, which is the roles of the president. Okay, and this is going to be a relatively short discussion, but I want you guys to see the connection between the roles the president plays. Just like what we discussed in class on Friday, we all play roles. I'm a teacher, but I'm also a husband. I'm also a father. I power lift. These are all roles that I have in my life. Similarly, you all have roles that you play. You're students, but many of you are athletes. Many of you are siblings. You're a brother to somebody. You're a sister to somebody. You're all children of parents or guardians. You can be dancers. You can be horseback riders. The point is that we all have these different roles in our lives that in some way define who we are. Similarly, the president has roles that you should be aware of. And like some of the roles are obvious. All right. They're based directly on Article 2 powers, the commander-in-chief role. The role as chief executive, the head of the millions of people that work for the executive branch. Those are obvious roles. Others aren't as obvious. The head of the political party that the president occupies, as chief diplomat, chief legislator, and there's many more that we'll talk about. The head of the party role, does it have a constitutional basis? I'd like you to answer that question and consider it. Now, this role is a function of the rise of political parties. Okay, by virtue of being the highest elected figure of a particular political party, that means the president is going to be the head of that political party. I mean, look, when you look at today's world, President Obama is the head of the Democratic political party. Okay, who's the head of the Republican Party? That's a harder question, isn't it? Is it Chris Christie, New Jersey governor? Is it John Boehner, the Speaker of the House? Is it Ted Cruz, the U.S. Senator from Texas? Nobody really knows. And that's part of the point. I mean, when you're the president, you're the highest elected figure of your political party, and thus you are the head of that political party. Now, that the power that comes with that role kind of depends upon the times that the president is living in and also the popularity of the president. You see that most in the midterm elections. Okay, if the president is popular, then there's a coattails effect. And what that means is that the president's popularity will help elect people, fellow members of the same political party, who are further down on a ballot. For example, a popular president can help get a state representative of the same political party elected, or a state senator, for example. It's going to have an effect down the ticket. Now, in midterm elections, when the president's not on the top of the ballot, the effect could be minimal. If the president's unpopular, members of his or her political party are going to run the other way, okay, just to get away, create distance between the president and themselves. But it all depends upon the times, okay, and that the president's living in and their relative popularity. Chief diplomat, the president has this role, and it involves basically establishing and maintaining relations with other states around the world. And I want you to consider whether there's a relationship there between constitutional powers that the president might have and this role. I mean, take, for example, the One China policy. Back in the 1970s, okay, the People's Republic of China took over China in 1949, right? Well, Taiwan, which is an island nation off the coast, was the location where the defeated remnants of the original government, of the non-communist government, fled. Well, the People's Republic of China stated that we, the PRC, as a condition of diplomatic relations demand that any country that wants to deal with us, China, must recognize our sovereignty over Taiwan. Taiwan, the democratic island that's off the coast, demanded as a condition of diplomatic relations with them recognition of their sovereignty over all of China. Okay, and well, how do you string that needle? If you want to have relations with one of them, you got to sort of tell the other one that they don't really have legitimacy. Well, America's response in 1972 is a great example of this role of the president as chief diplomat. It's referred to as the Shanghai Communique. And here it is. I'm just going to quote it, the pertinent part. The United States acknowledges that Chinese on either side of the Taiwan Straits maintain there is but one China and that Taiwan is a part of China. The United States does not challenge that position. Now, diplomatically, America has relations with the People's Republic of China, and it also has relations with Taiwan. Now, America doesn't have an ambassador from Taiwan, but they do maintain trade and defense treaties, but they just stop just short of having an ambassador. They have significant trade ties, and that's sufficient. That threading the needle is sufficient to demonstrate, I hope, the diplomatic role that the president has. Okay, this is a very important thing when you consider relations between different countries. The chief legislator role, consider if it has a constitutional basis. And in this role, the president influences the legislative process in both the House and the Senate. Okay, the president strives to achieve his or her agenda, his legislative agenda. I mean, if you want laws passed and you want to affect change across the country to realize your vision of where America should go, then you're going to need to pass laws. You're going to need to work your allies over in the House and the Senate to get them to do what you want them to do. Remember, they're elected figures too. They're not necessarily going to coincide with your goals. And again, it's related to the role as head of the political party too, for reasons that I'm interested in you discussing a little bit in the Google Doc or in your notes. And I'll leave that to you to figure out for yourself. As head of state, this role relates to the president being the highest ranking position in a sovereign state. And what that means is that the president acts as the chief public representative of America to the rest of the world. And President Obama, or any other president, is symbolic of the country as a whole, okay, in this role as head of state. Now, in America, the U.S. president is both the head of state and the head of the government. Okay, that's not the way it is in every other country in the world. We're not going to spend a lot of time thinking about that. But the president is the elected head of the government, and by virtue of being elected head of government, is also the head of state. And that triggers certain diplomatic and protocol treatment. But in Great Britain, for example, the Queen of England is the head of the state, while the Prime Minister is the head of the government. And so they have a divided sense of this head of state versus head of government. In America, there is no distinction between head of state and head of the government. It is largely a ceremonial role, but it's an important one. Okay. The final role I want you guys to think about for the time being is that of chief law enforcer. This role emerges from the existence of so many national law enforcement agencies, from the FBI to the Secret Service, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, the DEA, and a host of others. While the Attorney General is the head of the Department of Justice, and that is the individual who's designated as the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of America, well, who appoints the AG? And of course, that's the president. And the president spends a lot of time talking about these issues of law enforcement and gun control and all these things as chief law enforcer. I want you to consider that role as well. I hope to see all of you on Monday. Take care.